If you're listening to this YouTube video, it's probably because you know me. And if you don't know me, I don't know why you're listening to this, but you know what? Feel free to keep going. This is going to be really long. Basically, this is kind of the audiobook version to some really long journal notes I've been writing for quite some time. Basically, this is the journal writings of somebody who has gone from, Christian to coming out of the church and, down the road to where it's taken me now. And I've spent some time to actually write those things out. I didn't expect it to be this long, and to be honest, it's like over 100 pages and some more. So I realize that, if you're listening to this, it's probably because we've already talked about it. And, we don't always have time to sit down and read what pretty much ended up being a novel here, in my case, with what I've been writing. So, turn it on, put the earphones in or turn it on while you're doing housework or whatnot. It sometimes is easier. So this is kind of like the audio version of my journal notes of, I don't even know what I would call this, where I've been, where I've come from, and how I got to where I am today. So I just wanted to share a little bit of that through my journal writings. So basically, I'm just going to be reading, so consider this to be the audiobook. So here we go. Part 1. When I was younger, I remember usually having some kind of question in the back of my mind. And it could be about anything. I was not the most vocal person in the classroom or in the church youth group. And most of the time I would just keep my questions to myself because I was too shy to speak up. I liked to learn. The mechanics of anything intrigued me. I have always had more of an operational and logical kind of brain. And I've come to find here in my later life, that's helped me quite a bit. Or according to some people, maybe gotten me into trouble. But more on that later. Unfortunately, in some ways, our society has morphed us into a people who don't stop and take the time to ponder things much bigger than ourselves. We are busy. We do not have time. We are easily distracted. I think whoever the they behind our society is, loves the fact that we are busy people and with less time as the decades progress to stop and ask questions. And I paint people with a broad brush here, but thank goodness there are still some who have decided to step outside that realm of busy to take the time to slow down. Now as I look back, I see that we are programmed from a young age not to ask questions. Well, I will concede. Our teachers in school or pastors at church greatly express how there's, quote, no such thing as a stupid question, and that we should always stay curious. Yet there seems to be a small boundary of questions that seem appropriate to ask. And if you step outside that boundary line, well, then you've gone too far. So let me rephrase my initial thought about this. We are programmed from a young age about what is appropriate to ask and what is not. Thus, we must stay curious and question, so long as it's inside that box. We are generally trained to never ask questions. We are generally trained to never question what our doctors say about health, because after all, they've been to a very expensive school and they know way more than you ever will. Don't question your teachers. After all, they sit much higher than you and have more intellect than you. Your pastors have gone to seminary, so don't question them unless you're bringing the appropriate questions that fit into the, quote, norm of what is appropriate to ask. Because asking anything else would question these authority figures' position. And when those questions are asked that lurk outside that box, a negative response will sometimes be given for even asking the question. So we are not really programmed as a society to ask questions. We're only given the illusion that we can. Going outside that box, we will find just how quickly we can be shut down or labeled a conspiracy theorist or just plain loony. But why? I didn't mean to get off on a rabbit trail about this. I am taken back to my junior high years. I remember after a Wednesday night church group asking a question to an authority figure, and one I trusted to have much wisdom on biblical topics. I had been thinking about all the other religions in the world, and I remember thinking, quote, why are they, the other religions, so devout to what they believe, especially if it's the wrong one? End quote. I was thinking about Muslims and a few other larger religions, and here I was, a Christian growing up in a Christian atmosphere and society. It was all I knew, and of course it had to be the right one, right? After all, only one religion can be right. And we have the Bible, and it's the only true book, sure. So I asked a very innocent question to this person, and it was, there are a lot of different religions, so how do we know for sure that Christianity is the right one? It was a sincere question. I remember a flicker of curiosity that if for some reason my religion wasn't the right one, then there's an obvious problem. Only one can be right, right? And if we are so sure, but they are also so sure, then how can this be? Everybody can't be right. How can so many religions have such an assurance about their beliefs if not everyone can be right? Because I thought maybe that could be the case for me, but I wasn't sure. Therefore, there are many who are absolutely sure they are correct but are not. Every religion across the spectrum of beliefs have had personal experiences, feelings, or even visions that promote what that person believes is correct. So if all walks of life and whatever God they believe in has had experiences and visions and even had miraculous things happen that prove to them that they are correct, then how is Christianity any different? That seemed a bit tricky in my young mind. Just believing you are right doesn't prove you're right. All other people in other religions believe they are right. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in that religion, but seeking the right one. That was all my young brain could handle in that moment. It was as if the question in some ways stunned this person. They did not have a ready answer, and I can't blame them. I mean, it's a fair question, right? But one we don't often ask. I remember this being the first time I actually had a stirring to understand the foundations of my beliefs as a little junior higher girl. Perhaps all because I just needed to ask questions. I quickly learned that this was not one of those in the boundary lines questions. This person really did not have a straight answer, and it was something to the effect of, well, we just know. We have the Bible, and we know the Bible's true. Not being one to push a matter, I just let it go. That had to be good enough, I guess. For the majority of my life after that, I didn't think much more about it. But this moment is frozen in time, in my mind, and will always stick out as a pivotal point in my life. A couple years later, I remember asking the question in high school of why the Sabbath changed. It would appear that the Jews kept the Sabbath on Saturday, and to this day they still do. In the Bible, the Sabbath was on Saturday. So then why do we keep Sunday as this day? I still don't remember getting any kind of response from the teacher I asked. Again, I didn't push the matter after all. I remember distinctly this thought crossing my mind, and I quote, well, if something as big as this, it would be obvious that there was a good enough reason it had changed, and I suppose the guys who've gone to school would have said something if it was wrong to change the Sabbath. Therefore, since this is standard practice, it must be right. Those smart guys have it all figured out. I see now just how programmed we are to believe that the smart guys have it all figured out, and we should just accept this. And in a way, it excused me from having to think for myself. Looking back on my high school years, I am really trying to figure out what was going on. There I was, the mission trip girl, the prayer warrior, the one who thrived on taking the time in the still of the night to go find a place to just sit, ponder, pray, and be silent. In high school, it was the backyard in the moonlight. In college, it was the prayer chapel on campus in the warm glow of dim lights against stained glass. I seem to have been looked up to as more of the spiritual leader type in our youth group. We took several mission trips out of the country. I ask myself now, did I do all of this just because it was expected of me? Did I seek a relationship with God because it was the commendable thing to do? Seeking the approval of those in authority is a natural thing to do when you're young, and a big part of me would say yes. I did all those things because they were commendable by men, and it was just the thing we're supposed to do. It was a way to get the approval of the adults around me. I was a good kid. I wanted to be known as someone who acts rightly and isn't getting into trouble all the time. Regardless of the motivation back then, I do think the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has always been alluring me to his side. I truly believe he gives all men this calling. It is all around us, and if we could be still long enough to hear him, we would see it. College came and went, and married life became my new frontier. As far as spiritual matters go, I found myself in a place of great spiritual complacency, and that didn't happen all at once, I don't think. It came from a place where I saw problems between the Old Testament and the New Testament that I could not resolve. To make matters worse, I couldn't find any answers that were what I would have considered good enough, unless jumping through loopholes and trying to make them make sense. My husband and I attended a Sunday school and the church service on a regular basis at our town's local Baptist church. Yet I still found myself lacking. Was it my fault? Was I not reading my Bible enough? Was I not praying enough? I remember sitting through another Sunday service, hearing the typical sermon on why we should be blank and how to be blank, you fill in the blank. I remember thinking, these are great motivational speeches I could get from even a non-biblical person about common sense morality. But what about stuff like history in the Bible? What about the historical stuff that went on in the book of Kings or Joshua? And what about understanding the context of the times in the first century? I felt the feeling of just being so impotent in my knowledge of biblical writings, and it left me feeling like I was starving. I knew if I had to have a conversation with an atheist about my beliefs, I would look like a complete idiot because all I could give you was a motivational speech about, something, anything. I really knew nothing, but oh boy, I could recite some memory verses for you. Should we really have to go to seminary to be a professional to get teachings that are more in depth? Does our pastor think we're not smart enough to understand something a little more meaty, whether that be more historical or contextual events that are happening in the passages? I've been hearing the same message week after week, like for decades, and of course it all ends with the story of the cross and an altar call to neatly tie it all up just in time for lunch, just as the pastor was taught to do. The feelings of spiritual hunger mixed with complacency, along with wondering why I could ask a simple question to this day of why the Sabbath was not changed to Sunday now and still not get a straight answer from someone I would have considered study in the scriptures was just bothersome. A typical answer I would get was, Jesus rose from the grave on Sunday, so now we honor him on Sunday. Or something to that effect. My thought was, who gave man authority to change this? So if God calls something wrong, would it ever be right? If he wanted us to honor his day Saturday, would he ever call it right to switch it without his authority? God didn't exactly tell us he was going to do this. I just found that every answer I was given was very churchy and still left holes where I would assume there should be no holes, especially if we were to take our faith so seriously. The issue about the Sabbath was just the beginning for me. I then also had some serious questions about why Christmas and Easter were not in the Bible, and I was kicking myself more that I had never really thought to ask the question why they were not in the Bible. I never questioned where rabbits and dyed eggs came from. We grew up doing these holidays, and with how routine they are, it's normal not to question why. It's just what we do. But if they were not in the Bible, they had to come from somewhere, right? So when I did a little digging, which is not hard to do in our age of information, I found out that both Christmas and Easter were traditions that go all the way back to Nimrod in Babylon. I had to scratch my head. So it would seem these practices were mixed with early Christianity around the 3rd century, and this practice was always taking place in the Old World. So if they were worldly practices, were they okay to mix in with our faith? I remember the last time I ever sat through a Sunday service. It was Easter Sunday of 2014. It was awful. Sure, the service was beautiful, the typical jubilant kind of service with nice songs, extra special performances, and a good old message of Jesus rising from the grave that I've heard since I was little. There was just something about it, though. I cannot fault the pastor. He was just doing what was expected of him. But when the altar call was given, no one came to give their life to Christ. So he asked again and again as he had the musicians sing just one more verse of the hymn. Still no one came. He did not hide a look of disappointment on his face, as though he had failed in some manner because nobody walked down to make an altar call. On the way home, I remember thinking about how embarrassing it seemed for the pastor who, in a way, seemed to beg for someone to come to the front and dedicate their life, but no one showed, as if he had failed in his sermon or something. It kind of felt like that whiny girlfriend who's just been broken up with and is just begging her boyfriend to come back to her. It's just embarrassing and repulsive in a way. I actually felt kind of bad for him. Then it got me thinking, in the Bible, you never saw Jesus begging people to follow him. He never sounded like a whiny boyfriend who was embarrassed that no one would follow him. There was more of a just shake the dust from your feet kind of attitude about it. It was about that time that I realized that this was it for me. I decided I was done with church. It was never the fault of any church. Before then, no matter where we went church-wise, was always the same thing wrapped in a different package. Something in my gut was repulsed by it all. I just had to be done. So for a period of few months, I decided I was just better off being an atheist or agnostic or something. Maybe just be nothing. I honestly didn't know. I was honestly at peace about letting Christianity go and letting religion go. So I did. God was dead to me. I was done. For that next couple of months in the spring of 2014, it seemed nice to not have any religious cares. But after a while, there was some kind of gut feeling I could not escape from. What was it I felt inside me that was calling me? It was frustrating because on one hand, I knew church or Christianity couldn't be the answer. I mean, I've done that my whole life. It was a dead end. I had also briefly studied other religions and quickly realized how shallow they were as well. It's just another religion packed in a different way from how I was raised. I didn't want to just trade in one religion only to end up in another. On the other hand, I had no idea what this gut feeling was and what to do with it and where to go. To make a very long story short, it happened to be late spring of 2014 that I was sitting and watching the sun go down on our large back deck. I was very disturbed in my gut or soul or spirit, however you want to phrase it. A part of me the whole time that I had been in this rock bottom place couldn't let go of the idea that there just has to be a God. I knew there had to be. I just knew that I didn't really know him, like know him. I knew how to play the part of the mission trip girl, the prayer warrior girl. I knew the right things to say, the canned answers, and it just all felt so empty. I finally had to be honest with myself and admit I knew nothing, and was honest with the fact that maybe it's okay to have been wrong in my beliefs. Because to have to face the fact that perhaps we've been wrong is a huge deal, and with it brings great fear that we don't always want to face. But it freed me up from trying to hold on to something. It freed me up to genuinely want to search out the Father. And I can say, as odd as it felt at the time, it was just freeing to simply be honest in that way. Then came my last plea. I remember standing up gently on the deck that evening, not proudly, but just as someone who's tired. Tired of lies, tired of tradition, tired of confusion and not knowing what I felt. Yet I stood making some kind of demand in a way. My prayer was something to this effect, and I quote, "Surely there's a God. So I am asking you, God of the universe, creator of all things, not the God of the Buddhists, not the God of the Hindus, not even the God of the Christian or God of whoever or wherever. I am talking to you, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm asking you to show me who you are. Actually, no, I'm not asking. I'm humbly pleading with you that if you exist, then you have to show me who you are. I am so tired of feeling lost and confused." It was a very humble demand because this was it for me, and I continued, "You have to show me who you are because this is it. If I cannot find you, then I'm done with everything. I am jumping off that metaphorical cliff of spiritual suicide, and if you cannot show yourself to me, then I'm not pulling the ripcord. I'm just done. Yet at this point, I don't care what the truth is. I just want to know it. I don't care what it costs. I cannot die having not known truth. I cannot die having lived a lie my whole life. I just want truth." And I stood there. With that plea, I came to grips with what it really means to fully hand over control and to realize that this life really isn't about me. To be at a place where you are willing to sacrifice whatever it is for truth, it truly is one of the most free places I could have been. A weight seemed to leave me at that moment. I was emptied and ready to be filled. The wind blew my hair around my face as I stood there on the deck. The sky was a deep red and orange as the sun was fading over the horizon. There was nothing remarkable about the moment, but it was quiet. Nothing special happened, no booming voices. Everything was pretty normal. In the stillness of that moment, I remember distinctly hearing something in my gut that spoke and said something directly but to this effect. You want to know me? Then go read your Bible. But this time, I want you to start at the beginning. I shook my head quickly as if coming back to reality from a hard stare. What? Like, for real? This was some great divine revelation or, quote, the voice of God I was hearing at that moment? Really? Go read my Bible? It honestly made me quite mad. Here I am crying out, and the only thing I hear is, go read your Bible? Does this voice not realize I've been doing this my whole freaking life? Then I remembered the last part. This time start at the beginning. That was the key phrase that stood out to me. I was still mad, but I agreed. Fine, I'll go read it one more time, but if by the time I get to the end and I'm still confused, that's just it. I'm done. I wasn't expecting anything great to happen. I was expecting to start reading and be in the same boat I had been in my whole life. I was not expecting to be changed. This concludes part 1.